My grandfather had a saying. He used it whenever he saw someone reach too far, grab too much, convince themselves they were stronger than the situation they were walking into. He would shake his head slowly, look them dead in the eye, and say, "The trap doesn't look like a trap until it closes." Xi Jinping is about to find out exactly what my grandfather meant, because something snapped in the Taiwan Strait in the last 72 hours. Not a missile, not a naval collision, not a diplomatic cable. Something far more dangerous snapped. A miscalculation, the kind that doesn't announce itself with sirens or emergency broadcasts, the kind that looks, in the moment, like strength, like opportunity, like the smartest move on the board. And then the jaws close, and the man who thought he was the hunter realizes he has been the prey the entire time. We are going to show you exactly what snapped, who set the trap, and why the analysts who have been watching Xi's moves for the past decade are now saying, quietly, in the language that intelligence professionals use when they don't want to cause panic, that Beijing has just made an error from which Xi Jinping's regime may not recover. Stay with this, because what you are about to understand is not just a story about Taiwan. It is the story of how the most powerful authoritarian government on Earth outsmarted itself. To understand what snapped, you need to go back 18 months to a conference room in Zhongnanhai, the walled leadership compound in central Beijing where Xi Jinping meets with his senior military and intelligence chiefs behind doors that no camera has ever penetrated. In that room, over the course of 2024 and into 2025, Chinese strategic planners developed what internal documents, later reviewed by analysts at Rand Corporation and the Center for Strategic and International Studies, described as a window of strategic opportunity theory. The theory was elegant, almost beautiful in its logic. It went like this: America cannot fight two major wars simultaneously. If the United States becomes deeply committed to a military conflict in the Middle East, its ability to project force into the Pacific drops dramatically. Aircraft carriers that are in the Persian Gulf are not in the South China Sea. F-35s flying combat missions over Iran are not flying deterrence patrols over Taiwan Strait. The window, according to Beijing's planners, would open the moment America pulled its Pacific assets eastward. And when that window opened, China would move. Not with a full invasion, that was never the first step, but with pressure, escalation, intimidation, the kind of gray zone coercion that slowly, methodically turns a democratic island of 23 million people into a psychological hostage. On March 5, 2026, Chinese Premier Li Qiang stood before the National People's Congress and announced in language more direct than Beijing has used publicly in 3 decades that China would wage what he called a determined fight against separatist forces in Taiwan. Not a peaceful reunification aspiration, not a peaceful development framework, a determined fight. Those 2 words, broadcast in Mandarin to 1.4 billion Chinese citizens and translated into every major language within the hour, were not a diplomatic statement, they were a starter's pistol. And within 48 hours, the pistol had been fired. Chinese Air Force J-10 and J-16 fighters began violating Taiwan's air defense identification zone at a rate not seen since the crisis of August 2022. Not 5 or 10 sorties, 20 to 30 violations per day. PLN amphibious vessels, the flat-bottomed ships specifically designed to land soldiers on beaches, began conducting what Beijing called routine exercises in the waters surrounding Taiwan. Chinese Coast Guard vessels pushed into disputed waters around the Protus Islands, waters that Taiwan has administered for decades without serious challenge. And on the diplomatic front, Foreign Minister Wang Yi delivered a statement so sharp, so deliberately provocative, that the Taiwanese Foreign Ministry issued a public response within 2 hours, describing it as a naked declaration of hostile intent. The window, Beijing believed, was open. America was consumed by Iran. The Pacific was, for a brief and precious moment, less defended. The trap was set. The prey was walking in. But here is what Xi's strategic planners missed, and this is the detail, the single analytical error that transforms China's window of opportunity into the closing jaws of the trap my grandfather described. China imports 12 million barrels of crude oil every day. 12 million. That is not a rounding error. That is the bloodstream of the second largest economy on Earth. Without that oil, Chinese factories slow. Without that oil, Chinese power plants dim. Without that oil, the economic growth numbers that are the only thing standing between Xi Jinping and a domestic legitimacy crisis collapse. Now here is the question that Beijing's strategic planners apparently failed to model with sufficient seriousness. Where does that oil come from? Approximately 23% of China's crude oil imports flows from one country, Iran, and every barrel of that Iranian oil must pass through one waterway, the Strait of Hormuz. The same Strait of Hormuz that at the moment Xi's military was escalating pressure on Taiwan, Iran was closing. The same Strait of Hormuz where the US Navy was sinking Iranian warships, destroying Iranian naval infrastructure, and establishing convoy escort operations that gave Washington effective control over what passes through that 33-kilometer choke point and what does not. Put yourself in Xi's position in that moment. You have spent 18 months preparing for this window. You have positioned your military. You have crafted your rhetoric. You have watched America commit its carriers to the Gulf. And then you look at your briefing outlook and you realize that the country you were counting on to keep your oil flowing is now at war with the country whose navy controls the water your oil must cross. The window did not open. The window was a door, and on the other side of that door was not an opportunity. It was a room with no exits. Because Washington understood this before Beijing moved. This is the part of the story that does not appear in Chinese state media. The Trump administration's decision to commit heavily to the Iranian confrontation was made in ignorance of the Taiwan equation. It was made with the Taiwan equation fully on the table. The calculation in Washington was deliberate. If America moves decisively against Iran, it tightens its grip on the Strait of Hormuz. And if America tightens its grip on the Strait of Hormuz, it holds a hand around China's economic throat that requires no aircraft carrier in the Taiwan Strait to be effective. You do not need to park a warship off Shanghai to deter Xi Jinping if you control the waterway through which his economy breathes. That is not strategy. That is a masterclass in strategic judo, using your enemy's momentum against him. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. The Power of Siberia pipeline, Russia's gas supply line to China, which China has been accelerating as an alternative energy source, currently delivers approximately 38 billion meters cubed of natural gas annually. That sounds significant until you understand that China's total energy consumption is so vast that Russian pipeline gas covers less than 4% of its needs. 4%. The breathless announcements about Power of Siberia 2, about the 30-year Russia-China energy partnership, about Mongolia transit routes and Yamal Peninsula supply chains. All of that infrastructure, even if completed tomorrow, covers a fraction of what flows through Hormuz. Xi cannot replace Iranian oil with Russian gas, not in months, not in years. The physics of energy infrastructure simply do not allow it. And Washington knows this, has always known this. The Hormuz card was always in America's hand. The question was only when to play it. The Iranian confrontation was the moment to play it. So here is what actually snapped in the Taiwan Strait. Not a cable, not a ship,
not a diplomatic relationship. What snapped was China's theory of leverage. For years, Beijing operated on the assumption that its economic size, its military growth, and its control of global supply chains gave it a form of mutual assured economic destruction with the West, that any confrontation would hurt both sides badly enough to deter America from ever playing hardball in the Pacific. That assumption snapped the moment the Strait of Hormuz was effectively under American and coalition control. Because now the economic pain is not mutual, it is asymmetric. China needs Hormuz, America does not. America is now a net energy exporter. The United States produces more oil and gas than it consumes. It does not send a single tanker through Hormuz for its own energy needs. China sends
hundreds every month, loaded with the crude oil that keeps Xi's economic promises to the Chinese people alive. The Taiwanese government understands this shift in the balance with remarkable clarity. Defense Minister Wellington Koo stated in late February that Taiwan's military posture was operating at its highest readiness level since 1996. The Han Kuang military exercises, Taiwan's annual war readiness drill, ran for 10 consecutive days in 2025, the longest in the exercise's history, and the 2026 iteration is reportedly being planned with civilian mobilization scenarios included for the first time. Coastal defense batteries are being repositioned, reserve forces are being quietly called up, drone production facilities are running double shifts, and, perhaps most significantly, Taiwan's government has approved emergency authorization for TSMC, the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, which produces over 60% of the world's most advanced computer chips, to begin implementing what industry insiders are calling scorched silicon protocols, pre-positioned procedures to disable or destroy fabrication equipment in the event of a Chinese military incursion. Because Taiwan understands something that Beijing may have forgotten in the excitement of its window of opportunity theory. The chips are Taiwan's nuclear deterrent, not because Taiwan would destroy them to hurt itself, but because a world where TSMC's fabrication lines go dark is a world where every smartphone, every automobile, every military guidance system, every artificial intelligence server on Earth stops receiving the components it needs to function. China's own technology sector, which depends on TSMC-manufactured chips it cannot yet replicate domestically, would be among the first to collapse. The trap, it turns out, has teeth on both sides of the jaw. Japan watched all of this unfold and made a decision of its own, quietly, without a press conference, without a dramatic announcement. Japanese Defense Minister Gen Nakatani ordered the activation of the Southwest Islands Defense Posture, a military repositioning that places Japanese Self-Defense Force assets on Okinawa, Miyako Island, and Ishigaki Island at the highest readiness conditions since the Cold War. These islands sit directly along the route that any Chinese naval force would need to traverse to conduct sustained military operations against Taiwan. Japan did not announce this to intimidate Beijing. Japan announced this because Tokyo has watched 20 years of Chinese gray zone escalation and has concluded that the time for subtle signals has passed. The Philippines simultaneously authorized expanded American military access to 4 additional bases under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, bases that cover the South China Sea approaches to Taiwan from the south. Australia quietly repositioned maritime patrol aircraft to Guam. The web that Washington built in the Pacific over 30 years, without announcement, without drama, activated. Not because America ordered it to, because every nation in that web looked at what was happening and made its own calculation about what was coming. Russia's role in all of this is worth examining carefully because it reveals the limits of the China-Russia partnership that Xi has been displaying so proudly at summit after summit. Moscow condemned American operations against Iran in exactly the language Beijing wanted to hear. Lavrov appeared on camera, angry statements were read. But Russia did not move a single naval asset to the Pacific in support of Chinese pressure on Taiwan.
Russia did not offer to supply China with emergency oil shipments at the scale needed to offset a Hormuz disruption. Russia did not do anything concrete that would actually offset the strategic pressure Washington was applying through its Hormuz position. Because Russia cannot. Russia is hemorrhaging its own military capacity in Ukraine. Russia's economy, already under severe sanctions, cannot absorb the cost of subsidizing China's energy gap. The no-limits partnership that Putin and Xi announced with such fanfare in February 2022 has limits, significant ones. And those limits are visible now in the gap between Russia's rhetorical support for Beijing and the complete absence of any Russian action that would actually change China's strategic equation. Xi Jinping is left in this moment holding a set of cards that looked stronger last month than they do today. His military is escalating, his rhetoric is sharp, his regional pressure campaign is active, but his energy supply is compromised. His economic leverage is being countered by American control of the waterway his oil must cross. His Russian partner is loudly supportive and practically absent. His theory of the window, the beautiful, elegant, logical theory that said America's Middle East commitment creates Pacific opportunity, has collided with the oldest lesson of geopolitical competition, that the most dangerous moment for a rising power is not when it is weak, it is when it believes it is strong enough to overreach. The trap does not look like a trap until it closes, and in the Taiwan Strait today, the sound you can hear, if you listen carefully enough, is the first faint grinding click of jaws beginning to move. So tell us, do you believe Xi moves on Taiwan in 2026, or does this energy trap force him to back down? That is the question every government in the Pacific is trying to answer right now. Leave your assessment in the comments below. Share this with someone who needs to understand what is actually happening in the Pacific. And subscribe, because this story is moving fast, and the next development will come before most people are ready for it. Thank you for watching.